Hello, welcome, and an excellent evening. And tonight we have another floppy disk drive. Of course, what else? And it's again a Commodore CBM Model 4040, which is the slightly earlier variant of the dual disk drives, only preceded by the 3040 and the 2040, which had different DOS revisions, but were otherwise pretty similar. They are relatively compatible to the Commodore 1541, which is the ubiquitous C64 drive. They have the same number of tracks, a very similar logical layout, and you can at least read disks between each drive usually, or at least in the direction 1541 to the 4040, I think. This was handed to me by an acquaintance who was looking for someone to repair one of these. They saved this one from a German high school. That's why there's something written on top here, which you will see in a minute or so, but it wouldn't boot. The symptoms were that all the drive LEDs came on, but nothing else happened. They never turned off. There was no motor starting up or anything. I analyzed it using the one ROM from PS Finlayson with the diagram in there, and even that wouldn't help. I pulled all the chips that were not necessary for booting, leaving only 3 chips, the one ROM, the Riot, and the CPU, and it turned out that the CPU was faulty. So there's a new CPU in here. The old one seems to be defective, at least defective enough that this machine can't boot, but it does boot now. However, when we will look inside this thing, although it is in really good condition, it is 46 years old and it is very dusty from the inside, even though it was stored somewhere in the school and there's no rust or anything, so it was stored very dry. There was, of course, 4 decades of dust accumulating in this thing, more or less, or at least 3 decades or 35 years or whatever, because I doubt that this was still used in the 90s, although you never know. Yeah, so let's have a look inside, and I will show you how to take it apart, how to clean everything, and how to put it back together. Plus, which parts I usually lubricate, because there are mechanisms in here. And yeah, that's basically all you need to do. And you can also rewire the power supply to run a little bit cooler on 240 volts, because they were designed for 220 volts. But yeah, if you're not feeling safe doing that, then you should definitely not touch anything at mains voltage, and always work on these things when they're not plugged in, obviously. So let's have a look. Quick personal note here. I noticed that my YouTube viewerships and all the statistics have gone down. Well, I do this as a hobby, but nevertheless, I would like to have a little bit more oomph on YouTube, so please make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet. You can also watch all my videos on MakerTube, which is totally ad-free, but if you do that, it would be nice if occasionally you can drop a coin in the hat over at Patreon, which also sometimes gets exclusive videos and always has like 3 days or 4 days in advance of all the new videos. Or you can use Ko-Fi or one of the other means that are all linked down in the video description. But most importantly, share my videos if you see one that you like and where you think some friend of yours would maybe be interested as well. Post it on social media. I'm personally on Mastodon, chaos.social/@root42. You can also get into contact with me via these means. Mastodon is also a platform that you don't need to subscribe to. You can just read my feed and that's it. It's also completely ad-free. I'm not taking sponsorships or anything like that. Sometimes I will maybe get 1 or 2 things sent by viewers or something, but that's more rare. This one here doesn't even belong to me. It's just here for repairs. I'm doing that for free, obviously, because, as I said, it's a hobby. But some things I do have to pay for, like all the tools that I have. So getting a little bit of money for that is actually a nice thing. But that should be all for this. Let's get on with the show. This came from the German city of Neuss. There's a high school there, NSG it's called, and they owned this device, and this was the way they would mark it, so nobody stole it and could resell it easily. Quite effective, I would guess. These drives have two screws at both sides here that you have to remove, and when you do that, you can just open this up like the hood of a car, and just like the hood of a car, on the left there will be like a rod, if it didn't disappear or anything. And this is the only part that has gotten a little bit rusty, so I might clean it up with a little bit of sandpaper, and that's that. The general layout of these drives is always very similar. You have the main board mounted upside down at the top here, which is actually quite a good thing because no dust will accumulate on the board or in the sockets. So I will just leave it as it is in place. All the dust collects down here, which is a bit of a shame because also the drive mechanisms will be relatively dusty. These are SA390 drive mechanisms by Shugart, and we will unmount them in a minute. I will leave the big filter caps in place. They should be pretty okay, I think. You can replace them, but they are pretty expensive to replace, and most of the time they are just fine. This is the big transformer. I will also remove this, at least so far that I can reach underneath and clean. And I will look up what I need to do to rewire it. There should be some solder tabs at the bottom, because this is the secondary side with all the tabs for the windings that give us the inputs for the voltage regulators down the left here. So this is the so-called digital board or main board, and this is the analog board, which is basically controlling the motors, stepper motor, drive motor, and the read-write heads. And I think there's also the amplification setup here for the read-write heads. So always make sure to take a photograph of all the plugs that you have here. There's one plug here at port B going over to the right side, and plug A going over to the left side. Be careful not to rip these off, because these are the read-write heads connections, and that's not very good if you lose those. But the first thing that we can do is to actually unplug these after we take note of where everything belongs. And then we can also unplug these connectors, which are the power and control lines for the stepper motor and the drive motor, on both sides for both drives. This is the power delivery coming from the main board, from the regulators, and this is the data connection between the analog board and the main board. In this way we have unplugged everything on the analog board, and we can take the analog board out, which incidentally is missing a screw. So I will look in my collection if I can find a fitting screw. I probably do have one, because I have a spare drive with a broken analog board. Quite a tiny screw. Make sure to keep them in a safe place. But this will already be enough to slide it backwards a little bit, and then it comes out very easily. And if you look at this, it's dirty. The bottom side looks quite nice. I'm not sure if there was any rework, because I see some flux residue, but otherwise it looks pretty decent. I will take this to the sink and wash it with some mild dish soap and a lot of water, and I will leave it out overnight on a dry cotton towel to dry off. Make sure that there's no remaining moisture, but other than that you can very easily clean this. It's best if you have an anti-static brush, but you can also use a toothbrush if you're in a pinch, and that should not destroy anything on here. Always make sure that you're not walking on synthetic carpet with rubber shoes or anything while doing this stuff, or make sure that you're properly grounded. But be careful if you're grounded and are working with higher voltages that can actually lead to electric shock. So bear that in mind. But for static electricity, you should make sure that you ground yourself to discharge properly. Afterwards, after the cleaning, we will take out the drive mechanisms and clean those. The next step, while the board dries off, is a bit more complicated because there are screws at the bottom. You can turn this whole thing around, but then these will come crashing down. So I usually close the hood again because we don't need it open for this. And I will let this thing precariously hang over the edge for a little bit. And you can't see that right now, but I will try to show it from below. There are screw holes at the bottom that we will now access. So right here and also over here, slightly outside of your view, are two screws, and two other screws are further to the middle of the case, and we need to loosen all of those, which we can easily do using a Phillips screwdriver. And after you remove all four of these, and they are very similar to the ones used in Commodore 1541 floppy disk drives, we can actually take out the whole drive mechanism. And we need to do that for both drive mechanisms to properly access them and clean up all the dirt and dust that have accumulated below those disk drives. So that's something that you need to do. Be careful not to put the center of gravity over the edge of your table, or it will fall down. And these things are really heavy, like 10, 15 kilograms, whatever that is in pounds, but they are heavy. That was quite the workout. And after that, you should be able to very carefully try and get this thing out via the front. And without the analog board in place, that should be no issue. With the analog board in place, this drive will not fit through. So we'll take this one, and you can already see that under there it's pretty clean. But still we can access this much better. We've got both drives out of the way now, and we can actually go to town more or less. Oh, look at this. This is something I lost the other day in here, which is fine. And the only thing that is still missing is taking out the power supply, more or less. But I think when I loosen these screws, there's still probably something attached from the back side. So yeah, there are two screws on the back side, so two in the front, two in the back. Let's quickly undo that and also remove that one here, at least insofar as we can move the transformer slightly out of the way. It's still attached to the filter capacitors, so that will not help us that much, but we can clean the underside of the transformer a little bit, and we can check if we can adjust it for 240 volts, which would be nice. If we can't, that is no big deal. And there's still always the option to fit new high quality, low noise switching regulators, as for example the DR regulators that I shown off in previous videos, but it's not necessary per se. Okay, I decided against doing the modification of the transformer because it is currently wired up very tightly, so I can hardly move it, and I would have to rewire everything, and it is mounted on standoffs that I could take off and then remove the connections below. But I think I'm not going to deal with this. What I'm going to do now is fetch a slightly damp cloth and remove all the dust. I do like to use something like Windex, or you can use no-name brand, whatever. This is the German brand, and put a little bit of that on a clean cloth and then just go to town and wipe everything down. If there are any rusty parts, you might want to Dremel that away a little bit and reseal that with some paint, probably black paint from a model paint shop, so to speak. You can apply that to make sure that the rust doesn't proliferate under the paint and, well, make things worse than it actually is. But yeah, I'm gonna clean this now and then we'll get back to this. This is much better. I think most of the dust is now out. I used a Q-tip to get into all the nooks and crannies here, because otherwise you won't get in there or you will cut up your piece of cloth. And it already got pretty dirty. So I think we're fine here. I will secure the transformer again because I put it on its side during cleaning to get to more of the inaccessible parts. And then we can actually start already cleaning the mechanisms, because those do need a good wipe down as well and some lubrication probably. We are going to take this apart a little bit because here are some things that can be more easily cleaned if we take off the front plate, and that is held in place with 4 regular screws, which you can easily remove. And then you have to be a little bit careful taking the front plate off because there's this sliding mechanism, but it's easy enough to take apart and put back together. And the aluminum die-cast frame of the floppy drive sometimes looks a bit dull or corroded, and sometimes I like to and that's also why I'm wearing the gloves, apply a little bit of the oxide onto a clean cloth, and please take a new clean cloth than before. And I like to rub that in, so to speak, onto the metal. But first let me do a proper cleaning beforehand. And the LED should also come off if we push it through. There's, I think, a ring fit around there, but maybe I'll leave it on. But make sure to clean out all these nooks and crannies here to make it look very nice. You can also use some plastic rejuvenation stuff. I don't have that. I think you can get these in car shops. They use that in cars to make the plastic nice and shiny. I don't have that, so I just use the Windex clone here and wipe this down. And you can also use the Q-tips on this part, obviously, to get into all the little details here. Afterwards, this will look already much better. And you can also wipe down the rails here. Make sure not to damage the plug of the read-write head while you do that. Also be careful with this part here. It has these little hinges that slide onto these knobs. Both things can be repaired by 3D printing them, but yeah, I don't want to do that, so I'm trying to keep this as intact as possible. There's still some dirt here, so I go through it with the cotton Q-tip, and that should make it look much nicer, and you can see how much dust has accumulated in here. And I like to spray a little bit onto the cloth so that I can wipe down this very nicely. It will evaporate. There's, I think, alcohol in there and some cleaning agents, but it's mild enough that in my experience it doesn't harm the plastic, from at least from what I've seen. If you got some other stuff that is mild and non-destructive to the plastics, feel free to use whatever you like. If you remove the LED, you can even put this like in soapy warm water and rinse it afterwards, and it should come out pretty nice. But I think this is already pretty nicely looking. There's not much dirt on here anymore. This also cleaned up very nicely, so there's no need for the deoxide to come into play. There is dirt on the rails, so I will clean them, and afterwards I will lubricate them with a little drop of lithium grease. I'm not sure if it's the right one to use here, but I do like to use it because it just sticks to the rails and doesn't go wandering around in the drive itself. So the way these works is they have like a spiral pattern on a plastic disc, and I'm gonna clean at least the spiral as far as I can get to it, so that the metal nub that is here, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's right here, that slides into the groove, and by rotating this thing with the stepper motor, this disc, the head actually moves around, and that's actually quite a clever mechanism. The reed head itself will be cleaned with some alcohol in a minute, but I'm using the Windex to wipe the plastic a bit down. Be careful, on the underside there's a little felt pad to put some pressure on the disc. If you need to replace that, you can use some high quality felt and use a little circular cutter that you use for punching, or hole punch basically, for punching holes into like girdles or leather, and use that to punch out a new one, and use some adhesive to attach that basically. But other than that, I think the felt pad can be kept alone if it's still intact, and you can see that by looking a bit down, and this one looks actually pretty nice. They usually last quite a long time, and if you get some issues with that, you can still repair that. So these are dirty. I'm gonna pick some IPA now and clean this part here, and then we will lubricate the motors and the slides. So this is some 100% pure isopropyl alcohol. I put some in this egg cup here. Take a little Q-tip, and then we're gonna scrub away on the read-write head. This looks pretty clean, but it doesn't hurt to do this maintenance here, and I can dry it off with the other side. And the head actually slides pretty okay around here, but I will still lubricate everything, because this drive is really old and can, I think, at least the motor usually can work with a drop or two of a little bit of oil. So I've got this silicone oil, which I think you shouldn't mix with anything else, but I do think this works pretty well for these motors. One drop is enough, and I will also put one up here into the bearing that is there. And then we can work this in just by turning this a little bit, but it turns actually pretty nicely. The motor can be turned by turning the flywheel down here, and then up there you can see that probably it will work the oil a little bit in. The motor has brushes, so little carbon pieces that sliding contacts basically, and they will wear out, and these will probably already have a reduced lifespan. But there is no easy way to replace them. You can open these motors, but it's a hassle to put them back together. So I would recommend not doing that. If you can find a new old stock motor, it has to be one of this kind with 12 volt and tachometer feedback, then you can replace these. I think I have 2 more new old stock ones, but yeah, usually they will last for a while because you won't have these running a couple of hours a day most of the time, so you should be fine. Now let's put on some lithium grease and work those rails a bit. So I have MG Chemicals lithium grease, and you really need only a very, very small drop. There's no need to go overboard with this stuff. And I will move this a little bit to the front, put a little dab on here, put also a little bit on the railing here, and a little bit on the railing back here, very slightly only. Then we can carefully push this back, and I will work the mechanism a couple ways back and forth just to have the rails slightly lubricated. And I do see some excess lubrication here, so I'll wipe it off with this part so that there's only a very, very thin coating on any moving piece here. And that's already it. Basically, this is all I would personally do on this device, and I will just repeat the same procedure on the other mechanism, and then I think this should be everything there is to that. This here slides over the top. I hope I can manage to do that. Yeah, this is looking nice. And then you slide this back into the rails here, and this already feels pretty decent. The clamp is now closed, and you can put in the little screws here. And I think that's all there is to this drive. Both drives are clean now, or as clean as I want them to be. I slotted them back in. I even found a second screw in my assortment of different miscellaneous screws that, well, I collected over the years. We can slot back in the now dry analog board, and I need to first get the read-write head cable out of there. And now we can, oh no. So the screws are stainless steel and they won't attach to my magnetic screwdriver, which is not good if you let it slip. But here you go. This should be safe and sound. We can reattach the first drive. I took out the other drive for the moment, but it will be inserted in a second. And back here, the read-write head can already go onto this. I think it was that one. Otherwise, it will not work correctly, because when it tries to read from one drive, the other drive will not spin, and then you get a read error. But this should work fine. I think the one on the right was port B, and the one on the left is port A. All right, we are supplying it with power and data cable. There you go. I will not screw them in place if we need to readjust them. What I will do is give this drive power and attach it to my Zoom floppy, so we can test if it can read and write disks. Before actually testing out the drive, I had to do one more replacement, and I think I'm gonna do the same replacement on this one, because I think it has the same issue. This here is a new motor. This here is the original motor that was in there, and the brushes, the carbon slip contacts, or whatever you want to call them. There's like graphite things, spring-loaded graphite blocks in there that make contact to the rotor of the motor, and those wear out, so to speak, just by friction alone. And you can open up these things here and here and here and here. And I think, I'm not sure where the carbon brushes are, but somewhere in there. And it's very easy to get this apart and back together, because you have to remove this little pulley here, and you need special equipment for that. So I will keep this, and I will ask around if someone can do the swap for me. But right now, this thing started screeching, and I will try to overlay a video here so that you can hear that. And now it is running more quietly. It didn't in the beginning, but very quickly started to screech. For the first couple seconds it's usually fine, and then it starts getting terrible. Replacing the motor helped with that. I will do the same with that, but enough of that. We should check out how and if this thing can format a disk and read and write disks. Right, moment of truth. Turning on the device. This sounds quite okay. Let's do a CBM control status on device 8, and we're getting back CBM DOS version 2, and that is good. The device was recognized. Let's do a CBM control directory on drive 8. And there we go. We do have stationfall and an infocom interpreter here. We can try and copy this thing. We read from device 8. We take the file name here, and it's a sequential file, so "-s". And we will also write to the same file name. And let's go, and let's see if this is working out. The motor is relatively quiet. Of course, it makes noise. It's a mechanical thing that is over 40 years old. But the stepper motor works fine. The speed is actually quite nice. So if it slows down, it means it has to retry reading the thing. And this will actually fill up the whole line and a bit more, because I think every dot is something like, I don't know, a couple blocks. There, it moved back to the middle of the disk because it already filled up half of the disk. Now it's reading still, and you can really nicely see that. I'm gonna try and put the command window up here, I think, so that you can see the mechanism. And that's it. And we can also try to copy the interpreter. Yes, something like that. That should be much quicker. It's only 28 blocks. And that's working fine. Okay. Then we can try to run a disk command. We can format a disk. Let's say we call it test. And I think I need to put an 8 here. Yes. Head banging. And if it can format a disk as well, then I think we are on the safe side. Now we will try to write back station fall onto the disk, and that's one whole exercise for this drive. For the other drive, I think I will need to swap out the motor, but I will test it first. And afterwards we can just put in all the screws that we are still missing. Those are the ones that are on the bottom side. And this machine is done and serviced, so to speak. Yeah, there we go. So we should be able to have a look at the directory. And yes, it is there. We can use the cbm copy command in the same manner. But we just need to specify that it's a sequential file, and that should copy back everything. I'll fast forward through that so that you don't have to wait, but I think this will work fine. And the motor still sounds fine. It's not as screechy as the original one. Okay, this file wrote correctly. We can also write interpreter, which is much quicker, obviously, because it's very small. And there you go. We have station fall for the pet written to this device. Let's do a double check if we can read that on the other drive. Another directory. And it switches automatically to drive 1, as it says in the first line. This is looking good. I will do one read cycle on that to check and see if that works. If the motor starts sounding weird, I will also replace that. All right, this seems fine. The motor sounds relatively okay, I would say. And let's also try to read the smaller interpreter. So I'm not sure if this really needs replacing. I think the second drive might be fine, which is often the case because programs default to drive 0, so that has usually much higher runtime compared to drive 1. Yeah, so that's good news. By the way, I took a Dremel with a, well, wire wheel or something, with a brass wire wheel, and removed all the rust. It does look a bit rusty here, but I think it's clean. It feels very smooth to the touch. I also oiled it a little bit and wiped off the excess oil to give it a little bit of protection. So this should be nice for many more years to come. And that's the taking apart and servicing of another Commodore Model 4040 dual floppy disk drive. We've seen this thing work. It can format disks on both drives. It doesn't produce that much noise anymore after swapping out one of the motors. I lubricated the bearing of the central spindle here once more, and this sounds also a bit better. Of course, these bearings will wear out in time, but I would say these things won't run for 8 hours a day anymore, but you will turn them on occasionally for an hour or two to demonstrate them, to play something like an Infocom game or some other basic games or whatever. But yeah, they are basically museum pieces, but museum pieces that still work, and we want to keep it that way. The only thing that I personally would perhaps do is replace the hot linear regulators with switching regulators of the low noise variant kind, because then all the thermal problems go away. And this is also reversible. So if you want to keep it like a museum piece, then you might not want to do that actually, but it's reversible, and I think that's fine. That being said, if it's 30 degrees in your room, you shouldn't probably be running that. So if you have AC or your room is like 20 to 25 degrees, I think it's safe to operate these for a moderate amount of time. But that's it for this piece here. I think, yeah, share, like, and subscribe as usual. Leave a comment, tell me about your stories with Commodore floppy disk drives, maybe even the big ones here for the pet. But other than that, see you in the next video. Bye!